This is an extract from the Leader podcast hosted by me, David Marsland. Find us wherever you stream your podcasts. No golden carriage to take the Queen to Parliament this time. A Land Rover swept her towards the House of Lords. Inside, she entered the chamber with Prince Charles for her first major engagement without her husband, Prince Philip.
My lords, pray be seated.
Charles, the Lords, MPs and the Parliament staff wore masks. The Queen did not, but nor did she have on her ceremonial robes. A simpler outfit was deemed more COVID appropriate. The pandemic, of course, is overshadowing everything in this state opening of Parliament, including the contents of the Queen's speech.
My lords and members of the House of Commons, my government's priority is to deliver a national recovery from the pandemic that makes the United Kingdom stronger, healthier and more prosperous than before.
And there was a lot more to come. With me to break it all down is the Evening Standard's Jack Kessler. So Jack, how are we going to level up the country then?
Well, one way they don't seem to be doing it, or at least not yet, is with a plan on social care reform. This was something that the Prime Minister promised that he would deliver in his 2019 address when he became Prime Minister on the steps of Downing Street. But there's, beyond a passing mention, not very much in it. And it's just strange because, this is something that's going to affect every single one of us. And, I'm old enough to remember Andrew Dilnot's 2011 reform recommendations, which even now still seem to be the most likely blueprint for reform, but we don't seem to be any closer to making it happen.
Yeah, that is one of the things that seems to be quite an omission from here. But then we do have things such as the voter ID and having to provide photographic ID in there. That they're going ahead with that, but not with some of the things that you might have expected to be in there.
Yeah, I mean, so there were 29 bills in the speech, but in some ways it was quite a light Queen's speech, particularly in the context of the moment we're in and the political terrain. So Boris Johnson has a majority of 80. That's the biggest majority any party has enjoyed since 2001. It's the biggest Conservative Party majority since 1987. And you do have to wonder what the Tories are actually planning on doing with it. And there's somewhat of a gap between their exceptionally successful political strategy, winning the Hartlepool by-election, council seats in England, set aside against their governing strategy or agenda, which is rather thin. And you compare that with the Cameron Osborne years, where they were obviously operating for most of the time in a coalition with the Liberal Democrats, who were ideologically more aligned with the Labour Party at the time. But of course, they made numerous, really quite substantial reforms. And it doesn't seem like this manifestation of Conservative government has that same level of ambition or focus.
But is that maybe because the pandemic has kind of overshadowed everything and it's perhaps curtailed some ambitions for them?
Oh, it's certainly swallowed up all manner of bandwidth in the civil service, as of course has Brexit and will continue to do. But they found time to do other stuff, like we talked about voter ID. They found time to attempt to repeal the Fixed-Term Parliaments Act, which so hobbled Boris Johnson at the end of 2019. So, I mean, governments find the time to get their priorities done.
Do you think London is a priority?
No, and I wouldn't just look at this Queen's speech. You would consider the past few weeks, months, and years. It's strange that Boris Johnson, who largely is Prime Minister, not just on the back of winning the Brexit referendum, but also having been Mayor of London for 2 terms, and he's sort of like that cool kid who is only nice to this other kid when it's the two of them together, but when he's surrounded by his other mates, he's making fun of us like everyone else. Sometimes I feel like we as a city were used, and now he's gone off and made friends with Hartlepool and Blythe and other parts of the country.
Yeah, is he shoring up support then in those formerly red wall areas? Does it look like that's the kind of strategy that he's aiming for here?
It's certainly the plan, and I wonder the extent to which, in order to keep those seats blue at the next general election, how much they have to do. Does there need to be serious delivery, or as we set out in our leader column this morning, is it simply enough to deliver a few pots of money, talk about cultural issues, explain how you got Brexit done, and that'll be enough? The balance of the elections last week suggests that it might be, but of course, a lot can change in a few years.
There has to be an element of risk there, though, when you've got big political characters like Sadiq Khan in London, Andy Burnham in Manchester, those Labour mayors, neither of whom I'm sure would admit to having Westminster ambitions, but it seems likely that they might, and they could come back and maybe take some votes from the Conservatives.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously we're the Evening Standard, and so London is in many ways our priority. But this is also about cities versus towns and rural areas. But specifically on London, I mean, we have 73 parliamentary constituencies, so I don't think London and the Conservative Party should be strangers. It certainly doesn't make much sense for the electoral prospects. And when you look at how Sean Bailey beat the odds, he certainly beat expectations in the mayoral election. It does suggest that if the Conservative Party took London a little more seriously, that they could be competitive here too. But it's certainly the case that beyond Keir Starmer's somewhat catastrophic weekend, Labour had a very good Saturday and Sunday in terms of picking up, what was it, 10 of the 12 mayoral races or something like that.
And Jack, as a political expert, as somebody who enjoys politics, having heard the contents of the Queen's speech, are you looking forward to this Parliament?
I think what we're still getting used to in British politics, and it's been somewhat suspended in animation because of the pandemic, is we are in a place we've not been for more than 10 years, which is a government with a big majority, and therefore, theoretically can get done whatever it wants to get done. We don't have a coalition, we don't have a narrow majority, we don't have a hung parliament. And so, I mean, if you are a Conservative, I think it's definitely a time to be excited and a time to get things done, because 80-seat majorities don't last forever. But in terms of people who enjoy going on Parliament TV and watching governments without majorities try and pass huge bills like withdrawal agreements or whether or not to stay in a customs union or not, it's probably less exciting.